Single mother arrived to find a baby in a bucket and a crib full of ash, but she became the fire that stayed lit. The notification on Maria Santos' phone buzzed at 11:47 p.m., just as she was finally settling into bed after another 16-hour shift at the diner. Her 8-year-old daughter Sophie was already asleep, curled up in the only bedroom of their tiny apartment above the laundromat on Maple Street. Maria's eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but she knew that ignoring a text this late could mean missing out on a weekend cleaning job that might cover Sophia's school supplies for the month. But this wasn't about work. "Maria, I know this is strange, but I need you to come to 2447 Oak Street right now. Apartment 3B. I can't explain over text. Please. Detective Rodriguez." Maria sat up, her heart immediately racing. Detective Rodriguez had been the one to handle Sophia's father's case 3 years ago, the domestic violence incident that had finally given Maria the courage to leave with nothing but her daughter and a black eye that took weeks to fade. Why would he be contacting her now? She called him back immediately. "Rodriguez. Detective, it's Maria Arados. I got your text. What's happening?" A long pause. "Maria, I need you to listen carefully. Do you remember telling me once that you used to work in child care before everything happened with your ex?" "Yes, but that was years ago. I had my certification for infant care, but I need someone I trust, and I need someone with experience with babies. There's a situation here and social services won't have anyone available until morning. I know it's a lot to ask, but can you come?" Maria looked toward the bedroom where Sophia slept. "I can't leave my daughter alone. Bring her. She can sleep in the patrol car with Officer Martinez while we sort this out. Maria, there's a baby here and just please come." 20 minutes later, Maria pulled up to a run-down apartment building she recognized from the worst part of town, the kind of place where sirens were background music and everyone minded their own business, even when they shouldn't. Police cars lined the street, their red and blue lights painting the cracked sidewalks in urgent colors. Detective Rodriguez met her at the entrance. He was a kind man in his 50s, with gray-streaked hair and eyes that had seen too much but somehow still held compassion. He'd been the first cop to ever make Maria feel like she mattered, like her story was worth listening to. "Thank you for coming," he said, guiding her toward the stairs. "I'll explain as we go up." Sophia, still half asleep, was settled in Officer Martinez's patrol car with a blanket and a promise of hot chocolate from the 24-hour diner down the street. The call came in around 10 p.m. Rodriguez explained as they climbed the narrow, dimly lit stairwell. Neighbors reported screaming, then sudden silence. "When we got here," he paused on the landing. "Maria, the woman who lived here, Sarah Chen. She was 22. Single mother just like you. We found her in the bedroom. Overdose. Looks like it was intentional." Maria's hand went to her chest. "Oh God. But that's not why I called you." They stopped in front of apartment 3B. There was a baby, 18 months old, according to the neighbor who sometimes watched him. "We found him." Detective Rodriguez opened the door and Maria stepped into a scene that would be burned into her memory forever. The apartment was small and sparse, with furniture that looked like it had been collected from various thrift stores over time, but it was clean, or had been before tonight. In the corner of the living room sat a wooden crib, and Maria could immediately see why Rodriguez had called it full of ash. Someone had burned papers, photographs, maybe documents. The remnants were scattered across the crib mattress like gray snow, but it was the bathroom that made Maria's breath catch. In the corner, next to the bathtub, sat a large plastic bucket, the kind used for mopping. And inside, wrapped in a wet towel, was a baby boy with dark hair and enormous brown eyes. He wasn't crying. He was just sitting there, shivering slightly, looking up at the adults around him with an expression far too serious for such a small face. "His name is David," Rodriguez said softly. According to the neighbor, Sarah called him Dave. She said Sarah was a good mother, but she'd been struggling lately. Lost her job a few weeks ago, behind on rent. The neighbor thinks Sarah put him in the bucket to keep him safe from whatever she was planning to do. Maria knelt down beside the bucket, and the little boy reached up toward her with small, chubby hands. When she lifted him out, he was surprisingly calm, nestling against her shoulder as if he'd been waiting for her specifically. "Where will he go?" Maria asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "Foster care eventually. But not tonight. The system is overwhelmed, and it's the middle of the night. I was hoping. I know you don't have much, but you understand what it's like to be alone with a child, and you have experience with babies." Maria looked around the apartment again. On a small table near the window, she noticed a photo that hadn't been burned. Sarah holding David as a tiny newborn, both of them smiling. Sarah looked so young, so hopeful, not unlike how Maria had looked once before life had worn her down. "Just for tonight?" Maria asked. "That's all I'm asking." But as Maria held David, feeling his small body relax against hers, she knew that Detective Rodriguez was asking for much more than one night. And somehow, despite every rational thought telling her that she could barely take care of herself and Sophia, she found herself nodding. The next few hours were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and temporary arrangements. By 3 a.m., Maria was back in her tiny apartment with Sophia still asleep in the bedroom, and David curled up on her sofa, surrounded by pillows to keep him from rolling off. She'd stopped at the 24-hour Walmart on the way home to buy diapers, formula, and a few basic necessities, spending money she didn't have on a child who wasn't hers. But when David had fallen asleep in her arms in the car, making soft little sounds that reminded her of Sophia as a baby, something had shifted inside her chest. The next morning, Sophia woke up to find a toddler playing with her toys in the living room. "Mom, whose baby is this?" Sophia asked. Her 8-year-old curiosity immediately piqued. Maria had spent the sleepless hours thinking about how to explain this situation. "His name is David, sweetheart. His mama went to heaven, and he needs somewhere to stay for a while." Sophia, who had inherited her mother's compassionate heart, immediately sat down on the floor next to David. "Hi, David. Do you want to play with my blocks?" And just like that, their little family of two became three. The next few days brought a parade of social workers, paperwork, and decisions that Maria never thought she'd have to make. The state wanted to place David in a foster home as quickly as possible, but there was a shortage of qualified families, especially for children under 2. "We can probably place him within the month," said Mrs. Patterson, David's assigned caseworker. She was a tired-looking woman in her 40s who seemed genuinely caring but overwhelmed by an impossible caseload. "You've done a wonderful thing, Miss Santos, taking him in temporarily. But you understand this is just until we find a permanent placement." Maria nodded, but her arms tightened around David, who had barely left her side since that first night. He was a easy baby, sweet-tempered, quick to smile, and surprisingly adaptable. He'd already started calling her mama, which broke her heart every time. "What about relatives?" Maria asked. "Does he have any family?" Mrs. Patterson shook her head. "We've done extensive searches. Sarah's parents died in a car accident when she was 8. No siblings, no grandparents that we can locate. The father is unknown, not listed on the birth certificate." That evening, as Maria was giving David a bath in the kitchen sink, her bathroom was too small for a proper baby bath. Sophia stood beside her, carefully holding a towel. "Mom, is David going to stay with us?" Sophia asked. Maria paused, her hands stilling in the warm water. "I don't know, baby. It's complicated. But he likes us," Sophia said matter-of-factly. "And we like him. And his mama is in heaven, so he doesn't have anybody else." Out of the mouths of babes. That night, after both children were finally asleep, Sophia in the bedroom, David in a makeshift crib Maria had fashioned from a dresser drawer, Maria sat at her tiny kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a stack of bills. Adding David to their household meant more expenses she couldn't afford: diapers, formula, additional food, clothes. Her income from the diner barely covered their current needs. But it also meant something else. It meant Sophia laughing more than she had in months. It meant Maria falling in love with a baby boy who reached for her every morning like she was his whole world. It meant feeling needed in a way that was both terrifying and wonderful. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Detective Rodriguez called just as Maria was getting ready for her afternoon shift at the diner. "Maria, I have some information about David's situation. Can you meet me for coffee?" An hour later they sat in a booth at the diner where Maria worked, David contentedly chewing on a teething ring while sitting in a high chair between them. "I've been doing some digging," Rodriguez said, his voice careful, "about Sarah Chen, about David's situation, and I found something." He pulled out a manila folder. Sarah had been trying to get help for months before she died. She'd applied for assistance programs, job training, housing support, but she kept falling through the cracks. There were notes in her file about postpartum depression that was never properly treated. Maria felt her chest tighten. She was trying very hard. "And there's something else." Rodriguez leaned forward. "She had a life insurance policy. Small one, but it was specifically set up to benefit David. It's about $15,000. That's good," Maria said. "That could help with his care wherever he ends up." Maria, she named a beneficiary to manage the money for David's care. Someone to make decisions about his future if something happened to her. Maria looked up from David, who was now reaching for her with sticky fingers. Rodriguez slid a paper across the table. It was a copy of an insurance document, and there in Sarah's careful handwriting was a name. Maria recognized her own. "I don't understand," Maria said, staring at the document. "I never met Sarah. How could she?" "Look at the address," Rodriguez said gently. Maria scanned the paper until she found it. 124 Oak Street, apartment 2B. "She lived right below you," Rodriguez continued, "for 8 months. The neighbor I interviewed, Mrs. Garcia from, she said Sarah used to watch you sometimes, coming and going with Sophia. She said Sarah mentioned once that she admired how hard you worked, how good you were with your daughter. She said Sarah called you the strong mother upstairs." Maria felt tears starting to burn behind her eye. "She watched me," Mrs. Garcia said. "Sarah was struggling with feeling like a failure as a mother, but seeing you manage on your own, working so hard for Sophia, it gave her hope. When she set up this policy 6 months ago, she told the insurance agent that if anything happened to her, she wanted David to go to someone who understood what it meant to be a single mother fighting to survive." David made a happy babbling sound and reached for Maria. She lifted him into her lap and he immediately snuggled against her chest. "She chose me," Maria whispered. "She chose you." That evening Maria called Mrs. Patterson and asked about the process for adopting Dave. It wasn't simple. There were background checks, home visits, financial assessments, and months of paperwork, but Sarah's insurance policy would help with the expenses, and Detective Rodriguez had offered to write a character reference. More importantly, when Mrs. Patterson came for the home visit 2 weeks later, she found David thriving. He was reaching developmental milestones, gaining weight, and clearly bonded with both Maria and Sophia. The tiny apartment was clean and baby-proofed, and Sophia had seamlessly adapted to her role as protective big sister. "I have to ask," Mrs. Patterson said as she watched David play peekaboo with Sophia, while Maria prepared lunch. "Are you sure you can handle this financially? Raising 2 children on a diner worker's salary won't be easy." Maria had been thinking about this question for weeks. "I've been talking to my manager about taking on more hours, and I've been looking into night school programs for medical assistant certification. It would take 2 years, but the pay would be better, and child care during classes. Sophia's old enough to help with David for a few hours in the evening, and Mrs. Garcia downstairs has offered to help when needed," she said. Maria paused, remembering the conversation. She said Sarah would have wanted the building to look out for Dave. 6 months later, Maria sat in a courtroom wearing her only good dress, holding David on her lap while Sophia sat beside her, swinging her legs and trying to contain her excitement. The judge, a kind-looking woman in her 60s, reviewed the paperwork one final time. "Santos, you understand that this adoption is permanent, that David will legally become your son, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails?" "Yes, Your Honor, and you're prepared to provide for his needs, emotional and financial, for the rest of his childhood?" Maria looked down at David, who was playing with the buttons on her dress. At 20 months old he was walking, saying a few words,
and had Maria wrapped completely around his tiny finger. "Yes, Your Honor, then it is my pleasure to grant this adoption. David Chen is now legally David Santos, and you, Miss Santos, are officially his mother." The gavel came down and Sophia let out a little cheer that made everyone in the courtroom smile. That night, they celebrated with ice cream for dinner and a movie on Maria's lap. David fell asleep in Maria's arms halfway through, and Sophia curled up against her other side. "Mom," Sophia whispered, "are you happy?" Maria looked around their small apartment. It was the same place they'd lived for 2 years, with the same second-hand furniture and the same tight budget. But now there were toys scattered across the floor, drawings taped to the refrigerator, and a high chair squeezed into the corner of the kitchen. The space felt fuller, warmer, more like home. "I'm very happy, sweetheart." "Me too. David makes us better." A year later, Maria graduated from the medical assistant program she'd managed to complete while working part-time and raising 2 children. The ceremony was small, held in a community college gymnasium, but Sophia and David were there in the front row, David clapping his chubby hands every time someone walked across the stage. Detective Rodriguez was there too, beaming with pride as Maria received her certificate. Afterward, as they stood outside the building, he handed her an envelope. "What's this?" Maria asked. "A little something I've been working on." Inside was a letter of recommendation for a medical assistant position at the Children's Hospital downtown. It paid nearly twice what she'd been making at the diner, with benefits and room for advancement. "Rodriguez, I can't believe you. You did something incredible, Maria. You saved that boy, but you also saved yourself. You became the fire that stayed lit when everything else was burning down." Maria thought about that phrase often in the months that followed, as she started her new job and moved the family to a larger apartment with 2 real bedrooms. As she watched David take his first steps and say his first full sentence, "Mama, love," as Sophia started middle school and proudly told her teachers that she had a baby brother she'd helped raise, the fire that stayed lit. Maria had been through so much darkness, an abusive relationship, single motherhood, poverty. There had been times when she'd felt like everything was burning down around her, like she was barely surviving each day. But when she'd found David in that bucket, when she'd seen the ashes in his crib representing his mother's desperation and despair, something had ignited inside her. Not the destructive fire that had consumed Sarah's hope, but a steady, warming fire of purpose and love. She'd become the mother who stayed, the one who didn't give up, the one who found a way to make a family out of broken pieces and somehow make it beautiful.